mean it doesn't translate on the ground in reality. So I think that aspect of it as well should not be forgotten and ignored. It's not just the process of it's going to take time, but the underpinning of what is affecting the lives of women in these societies is something that is going to take a long time. And as I often say, I'm very curious now to see what's going to happen in Saudi Arabia, and love to talk about that, so, especially in relation to this country.
Selma, what about you? I mean, you deal with domestic violence a lot. Do you see any opportunities with everything that's happening now across the Arab world?
Well, I have to say that we have not done much international work, and although I am Egyptian, I'm a second-generation Egyptian, I have not really had ties to Egypt, and so in reflecting on your question, it's just very interesting that the reason that I'm in the United States as a second-generation immigrant is that my parents both had to leave Egypt very young as a result of political persecution, and both of my grandfathers were political prisoners, and they were tortured under Nasser's regime. And so growing up, I didn't really feel much affinity, nothing positive really, you know, towards Egypt. And watching the protests, it was just such an incredible experience to actually feel pride in being an Egyptian and reclaiming a part of my identity that I really hadn't been aware of, that I'd lost it in the first place since I never had it. And so what I think the opportunity here is, it's so many levels. Of course, the people of Egypt, and I want to say that, you know, this is a Muslim country, and it's important that we use those words together when we're talking about peaceful progress and not only when we're talking about violence. But, you know, the people of Egypt have really found their voice, and if we want to kind of use a parallel, like with domestic violence, certainly, you know, dictators are the ultimate in, you know, controlling people. They have all the control tactics. And the Egyptian people, you know, as Dina mentioned, you know, we're kind of famous for using this word malish, which just means, nah, it's all right. Kind of just shrug your shoulders and what can you do kind of thing. And even, you know, as a second generation, you know, immigrant, that same sort of attitude is an attitude that I struggle with, you know, bump into it when trying to change people's attitudes about gender roles and family violence. But, you know, once a person is empowered, it's very hard to take that away from them. Once a person finds their voice, it's very hard to take that away and to silence them again. And so, you know, my hope is, you know, that not only for Egyptians, but what we see happening around the region, as people realize that they can overcome, you know, the ultimate in, you know, perpetrators of violence, their leaders, the dictators, that the change will not only be for those countries and the individuals, the men and the women, but also, you know, for the world and how the Western world views these Muslim countries, and, you know, what Westerners typically associate with Arabs, Arab women, Arab men. Anybody watching the coverage, I'm sure, could see that there were so many women participating in those protests. These are women who, you know, are intelligent, educated, risking their lives for a cause, for democracy, for making a change, making a difference in the world. You know, so I just think that we haven't even begun to, you know, realize all the levels of change that can occur for really the whole world. So it's a very exciting time, and, you know, it's become, I'm a couples therapist as well. That's actually my day job, and it's just interesting. I work with mostly Middle Eastern families and individuals, and so now people who have been struggling with their marital issues, they're like, well, if we could get rid of Mubarak, maybe we can solve our marriage problem. So it's just become a great metaphor of hope and change.
And Cindy, your organization, Vital Voices, deals, again, you know, with the empowerment of women and, you know, all these issues as well. Do you have any thoughts about, you know, what we're seeing happening across and what opportunities can arise?
I do think that there is a great opportunity for potential for the advancement of women in these countries, but I think it's important to note that you can absolutely have a democracy that does not address the problem of violence against women very well, that those two things are actually fairly separate. And I think it's interesting that, you know, the two countries who have most succeeded in this revolution, Tunisia and Egypt, had some of the most progressive laws and legislation on women in that area. And so I don't think that we should sit back on our laurels and really congratulate ourselves on our success yet. I think that we should absolutely see this as a great opportunity, but I do think that we want to make sure that these new democracies do maintain a focus on women's issues, and particularly at Vital Voices, we focus on women's rights, specifically domestic violence, sexual violence, human trafficking, and harmful traditional practices. And so I think that, you know, it is important that these things are very separate from just getting democracy. And we need to be mindful of that. And I think that, you know, Dina hinted at this, but even right now, as she mentioned, the commission that's working on the new constitution in Egypt is all male, and one of the provisions that has been talked about was that the wife of the new president couldn't be born overseas, but it kept referring to the wife of the new president, which would almost by definition mean that the new president is male. And that, I think, is part of the reason that people were saying, you know, depending on how you look at it, it could, you know, we don't want to, I think it's a great opportunity, but it is interesting that it was in two of the places where the legislation and laws on women were not that bad. Now, implementation is a whole nother story. So.
Well, actually, I was going to ask Dina on my follow-up question about that. This is the first time we've seen women come out, you know, to give the children off to the mother-in-laws or whatever like that and head down to Tahrir Square and that. I'm just trying to get a sense. I mean, is this something that we're seeing, you know, a whole bright new day for women like that, or do you think this is just going to stop short? In other words, knowing the Egyptian mind, if you like, and the Egyptian mind of a woman, do you foresee that this has started a ball rolling that's not going to, you know, get pulled back, or was this just sort of a, you know, a one-off? Because this, as you say, is going to be a very long process.
Right. Well, the estimates that are coming now put women comprising about a quarter of those assembled across Egypt's public spaces during this revolution, which is huge. Many of those women were out sleeping in Tahrir Square alongside men in front of tanks, again unprecedented in a country which is known for its traditional values. The other thing that I wanted to emphasize also is the really non-ideological sort of nature of this entire revolution. When you think about it, Egypt was known for having its strongest opposition force being the Muslim Brotherhood, which is an Islamist organization. Over the course of 18 days, not only did protesters never resort to violence, even though violence was meted against them by the regime, but they never descended into ideological partisanship whatsoever. At no point did the revolution become Islamist-oriented. As a matter of fact, there were manifestos that were circulating on the social media almost every day, emphasizing, one, the peaceful nature of the protests, and two, that anybody raising a particular political party banner or raising any kind of religious banner would be expelled. This is coming from the organizers of the protest. So for 18 days, which is not an insignificant period of time, at no point did we see this being overtaken by the Muslim Brotherhood, by Islamists of any kind. Really, women had a key role in all of this. Not only did it bring sort of, in Egypt when you go, just a casual observer will tell you that, you know, there are the veiled women and there are the elite non-veiled women that look at the veiled women as sort of, you know, not in their class or somehow too narrow-minded or whatever it may be. Everyone was out there together, women of different classes, veiled and unveiled, Muslim and Christian, essentially fighting for the same thing. I don't think that anybody is taking any of that for granted. What's funny is that when I would call my friends and family every day, my friends who are from my generation were the ones oftentimes that were at home, and I'd say, how's your mother? And they'd say, oh, she's in her tent in Tahrir Square. Literally, everybody was out, and even the very older women who were not able to go out and battle crowds, and many of them did, by the way, and I'm sure that many of you have seen footage of this, participated in their neighborhood watches that popped up all over the country. Again, an example of people staking a claim in their country's future. They were sweeping streets, they were cooking for the protesters. Everybody participated. Is this being taken for granted? No. Because of the composition of this constitutional committee, 64, I believe, women's groups have joined together to form a coalition to protest the absence of women from this committee and to demand that women be placed on it. And they're calling for a million women's march tomorrow in Tahrir, so watch out for that.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask. I mean, you know, everybody was talking at the time about, and this is to either of you, you were there, obviously, Nelofer, at the time, was it just we want democracy without getting any more specific than that, or did women's issues come up? Were the women starting to speak up at that time, or was that just too far out there at that point? Let's just get rid of Mubarak. What was your...
Well, there was, I mean, among the victims of the number of people that were killed, there were as well women victims that were killed. And in fact, the poster of one of the women victims became a motivating factor for the protester, because immediately when it started, there were some numbers of people out, and then the foreign media and Al Jazeera and everybody else started speculating and saying this revolution is dying out. There was not enough people. There were one night, the 28th of January, when there were police techs arrived and they started to really back